The crimson sun blazed mercilessly over Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, as Commander Mitsuo Fukuda's voice crackled through the radio waves. Tora, Tora, Tora. The surprise attack had succeeded beyond Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's wildest calculations. 18 American battleships lay broken and burning in the oil-slick waters, their twisted metal monuments to Japanese naval supremacy. Yet even as Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo's carrier strike force withdrew triumphantly toward the western horizon, a seed of doubt gnawed at Yamamoto's strategic mind. The architect of Pearl Harbor understood what his subordinates could not grasp. This devastating blow had awakened a sleeping giant whose industrial might dwarfed Japan's capabilities. Standing on the bridge of the flagship Nagato, Yamamoto studied intelligence reports flowing from across the Pacific. American aircraft carriers Enterprise and Lexington had escaped the harbor's destruction, prowling somewhere in the vast ocean expanse. "We have filled the Americans with terrible resolve," he confided to his chief of staff, Captain Kuroshima Kometo. "Now we must crush their naval power completely before they mobilize their full strength." Through the winter months of 1942, Japanese forces swept across the Pacific like an unstoppable tsunami. Wake Island fell after a heroic defense, followed by the Philippines, Dutch East Indies, and Singapore. General Douglas MacArthur's forces retreated to Australia, while Admiral Chester Nimitz scrambled to rebuild America's Pacific Fleet from his headquarters in Hawaii. The Rising Sun's naval aviation dominated every engagement, sinking the carrier Lexington in the Coral Sea and forcing Enterprise into desperate retreats. According to military historian Gordon Prange's definitive account, "At dawn we slept." Japanese confidence reached its zenith during this period of unprecedented expansion. By May 1942, Japan controlled an oceanic empire stretching from the Aleutian Islands to the Solomon Sea. Emperor Hirohito's admiral spoke confidently of dictating peace terms from the White House steps. Admiral Nagumo's First Air Fleet had proven invincible in 6 months of continuous combat, its veteran pilots claiming hundreds of Allied aircraft. The four fleet carriers Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu represented the most experienced naval aviation force in history. Yet intelligence officers in Tokyo began reporting disturbing developments. American industrial production had doubled since Pearl Harbor, with new Essex-class carriers sliding down shipyard ways at unprecedented speed. More concerning were intercepted radio transmissions, suggesting American codebreakers had penetrated Japanese naval communications. Commander Joseph Rochfort's cryptanalysts at Station Hypo in Pearl Harbor worked feverishly to decode enemy messages, their efforts hidden from Japanese reconnaissance. Yamamoto recognized that time favored America's vast resources. His strategic vision demanded one final decisive battle to eliminate the remaining American carriers. Before their numerical advantage became overwhelming, the target he selected was Midway Atoll, a tiny speck of coral sand 1,400 miles northwest of Hawaii. This remote outpost served as America's westernmost defensive position. Its capture would force Admiral Nimitz to commit his precious carriers to a desperate counterattack. The plan's complexity reflected Japanese naval doctrine's emphasis on elaborate coordination. Operation Me would begin with a diversionary assault on the Aleutian Islands, drawing American attention northward. Meanwhile, the main striking force would approach Midway from the northwest, its aircraft destroying the atoll's defenses before Admiral Nobate Kondo's invasion fleet landed occupation troops. When American carriers rushed to defend Midway, Nagumo's veterans would annihilate them in decisive battle, securing Japanese dominance for generations. As cherry blossoms fell in Tokyo's gardens, neither Yamamoto nor his staff suspected that their encrypted communications flowed directly into American hands, revealing every detail of their ambitious operation. Deep beneath Pearl Harbor's administrative buildings, Commander Joseph Rochfort hunched over stacks of intercepted Japanese radio transmissions, his bloodshot eyes scanning endless columns of coded numbers. The basement office of Station Hypo resembled a madman's laboratory more than a military facility, with decrypt sheets covering every available surface and coffee-stained charts plastered across the walls. For weeks, Rochfort's team of cryptanalysts had worked around the clock, sleeping on cots between their desks as they gradually penetrated the Japanese Navy's most secret communications. The breakthrough came on May 20th, 1942, when Lieutenant Commander Edwin Layton burst into Admiral Chester Nimitz's office clutching a decoded message fragment. "Admiral, we've cracked their operational code. Layton announced breathlessly. They're planning something massive against a target designated AF. The attack comes in early June with their entire carrier fleet. Nimitz leaned forward intently, his penetrating blue eyes fixed on the intelligence summary. As Pacific Fleet commander, he understood that this information could shift the war's entire trajectory. If the mysterious target designation could be identified, Rochfort's brilliant deduction solved the puzzle through an ingenious deception. Suspecting that AF represented Midway atoll, he instructed the garrison commander to transmit an uncoded message reporting freshwater shortages. Within hours, Japanese radio stations relayed intelligence that AF suffered from water supply problems. The trap had worked perfectly, confirming Midway as Yamamoto's primary objective. Armed with this knowledge, Nimitz began planning the most audacious ambush in naval history. Naval historian Walter Lord documented these crucial intelligence operations in his acclaimed work, Incredible Victory, revealing how code-breaking determined the battle's outcome. The American Pacific Fleet's condition remained precarious despite this intelligence windfall. Only 3 aircraft carriers survived from the pre-war fleet, Enterprise and Hornet, operated under Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance's Task Force 16, while the battle-damaged Yorktown underwent emergency repairs at Pearl Harbor's dry dock. Nimitz walked through the bustling shipyard on May 27th, observing welders working furiously to patch Yorktown's bomb-damaged hull. "How long for complete repairs?" he asked the yard superintendent. 3 months minimum, Admiral," came the reply. "You have 3 days," Nimitz responded quietly. Across the Pacific, Admiral Nagumo's First Air Fleet departed Japanese waters with supreme confidence. The 4 fleet carriers embarked their most experienced aviators, veterans of Pearl Harbor, Ceylon, and the Dutch East Indies campaigns. Lieutenant Commander Shigekazu Shimazaki led Zuikaku's dive bomber squadron, his pilots having sunk more light tonnage than any comparable unit. Similarly, Lieutenant Commander Takeshi Maeda's torpedo bombers from Hiryu had perfected the devastating tactics that destroyed Prince of Wales and repulsed off Malaya. The Japanese battle plan's complexity reflected their Navy's tactical sophistication, but also created dangerous vulnerabilities. Admiral Yamamoto divided his forces into multiple task groups, scattered across thousands of square miles of ocean. The Northern Area Force, under Vice Admiral Boshiro Hosagaya, would strike Dutch Harbor in the Aleutians, while Vice Admiral Kondo's invasion fleet approached Midway from the southwest. Meanwhile, Nagumo's carriers would attack from the northwest, supported by Admiral Yamamoto's main battle fleet following several hundred miles behind. This dispersal meant that Japan's superior numbers would be negated, with individual task forces facing potential defeat in detail if American forces concentrated effectively. More critically, the plan assumed complete tactical surprise, requiring perfect coordination between widely separated units operating under strict radio silence. Any breakdown in timing or communication could prove catastrophic. As May faded into June, both fleets steamed toward their destiny at Midway atoll. American cryptanalysts continued monitoring Japanese communications, providing Nimitz with real-time updates on enemy movements. The stage was set for history's most decisive carrier battle, where veteran Japanese aviators would face desperate American defenders in a clash that would determine the Pacific War's ultimate trajectory. Neither side fully comprehended how completely the coming engagement would reshape naval warfare's fundamental principles. The first rays of June 4, 1942, painted the Pacific horizon in shades of amber and gold as Admiral Chuichi Nagumo's carrier striking force approached Midway atoll from the northwest. Aboard the flagship Akagi, flight deck crews swarmed over rows of Kate torpedo bombers and Val dive bombers, their rising sun markings gleaming in the morning light. Lieutenant Joichi Tominaga, leading the first attack wave, studied aerial photographs of Midway's installations, while his aircrew gathered around plotting boards in the ready room. At 0 for 30 hours, Nagumo ordered the launch of 108 aircraft toward Midway, holding back his most experienced pilots and armor-piercing bombs for the anticipated carrier battle. Tominaga's mixed formation included 36 K-level bombers armed with high explosives, 36 Val dive bombers, and 36 Zero fighters to provide escort. The strike commander felt confident about overwhelming Midway's defenses, having participated in similar attacks across the Pacific theater. Meanwhile, 1,500 miles to the northeast, Admiral Raymond Spruance's Task Force 16 maintained radio silence as Enterprise and Hornet steamed toward their attack positions. Spruance had replaced the hospitalized Admiral William Halsey just days before departure, bringing a cautious analytical approach that contrasted sharply with Halsey's aggressive reputation. Standing on Enterprise's bridge, Spruance reviewed the latest intelligence upgrades from Pearl Harbor while calculating optimal launch times for his air groups. Military historian John Keegan's analysis in The Price of Admiralty emphasized how leadership changes affected tactical decisions during this critical period. Rear Admiral Frank Fletcher commanded the overall American force from the hastily repaired Yorktown, her flight deck still showing signs of recent battle damage from the Coral Sea engagement. Despite concerns about the carrier's structural integrity, Fletcher had insisted on joining the operation, bringing Yorktown's experienced air group to supplement the newer squadrons. Aboard Enterprise and Hornet, his combat veterans would prove invaluable in the coming engagement. At 0600 hours, Midway's radar operators detected the incoming Japanese strike approaching from the northwest. Air raid sirens wailed across the tiny atoll as Marine Corps fighters scrambled to intercept the attackers. Major Floyd Parks led 26 obsolescent Brewster Buffaloes and Grumman Wildcats into the brightening sky, their pilots knowing they faced Japan's elite naval aviators and superior aircraft. The courage of these Marine aviators would become legendary, though most would not survive the morning. Tominaga's bombers reached Midway at 0620, their formation splitting to attack the airfield facilities and defensive positions. Val-dive bombers screamed down through scattered cloud cover, while Kate-level bombers approached in precise formation, their bomb bay doors opening in unison. Anti-aircraft guns across the atoll opened fire, filling the sky with black smoke bursts as Marine gunners fought desperately to protect their base. The attack lasted 30 minutes, leaving Midway's runways cratered and several buildings burning, but failing to achieve complete destruction. American aircraft that had launched before the attack remained operational, while construction crews immediately began repairing damaged facilities. More importantly, Tominaga radioed Nagumo that a second strike would be necessary to neutralize the base completely. This message would prove fatally consequential within hours. Nagumo faced a critical decision as morning progressed into the decisive phase. His reserve aircraft remained armed with armor-piercing bombs and torpedoes for attacking American carriers, but Tominaga's recommendation suggested switching to high-explosive ordnance for a second Midway strike. The Admiral ordered the changeover to begin, unaware that American dive bombers were already approaching his task force from multiple directions. At 0705, a Japanese reconnaissance seaplane reported sighting American naval vessels to the northeast, but initial messages contained no mention of carriers. Nagumo hesitated, uncertain whether to continue rearming for the Midway strike or prepare for surface engagement. This moment of indecision would reshape the entire Pacific War's trajectory, as American attack squadrons converged on the most powerful carrier force in naval history. Admiral Nagumo's hesitation proved costly as contradictory reports flooded Akagi's bridge throughout the morning hours. At 0728, the reconnaissance seaplane from Cruiser Tone transmitted an amended sighting report. Enemy fleet includes what appears to be carrier. The message struck Nagumo like a physical blow, confirming his worst fears about American naval strength. His four carriers wallowed vulnerably in the middle of their rearming operations. Flight decks cluttered with ordnance and fuel lines as mechanics frantically switched bomb loads. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey circled high above the empty ocean in his Douglas Dauntless dive bomber, leading Enterprise's bombing Squadron 6 in an expanding search pattern. The veteran pilot had calculated the Japanese fleet's position based on earlier contact reports, but found only vacant swells stretching to the horizon. His fuel gauge showed dangerously low levels, forcing a critical decision between returning to base or continuing the hunt. McCluskey chose to follow his instincts, turning northwest toward a lone Japanese destroyer racing across the water. The destroyer Arashi had been depth charging the American submarine Nautilus for hours, unwittingly serving as a beacon directing American bombers toward Nagumo's carriers. At 0955, McCluskey's squadron crested a cloud bank and gasped at the sight below. For massive aircraft carriers, arranged in a protective box formation, their flight decks packed with aircraft and fuel trucks. Attack immediately, McCluskey radioed tersely, pushing over into a steep dive that would change naval warfare forever. Simultaneously, Lieutenant Commander Maxwell Leslie led Yorktown's bombing Squadron 3 in from the southwest. Their arrival perfectly coordinated despite having no communication with McCluskey's force. The mathematical precision of this convergence defied all probability, as if fate itself guided American dive bombers toward their targets. Below them, Japanese sailors frantically attempted to clear flight decks of the ordnance and equipment. That made their ships floating ammunition dumps. According to Samuel Eliot Morrison's official Navy History of United States Naval Operations in World War II, this moment represented the war's decisive turning point. The first 1,000-pound bomb struck Akagi amidships at 0:10:24, penetrating the flight deck and exploding among aircraft spotted for launch. Secondary explosions ripped through the hangar bay as aviation gasoline ignited, creating an inferno that spread rapidly through the ship's wooden deck planking. Admiral Nagumo stood transfixed on the bridge as his flagship transformed into a blazing wreck within minutes. Kaga suffered an even more devastating fate as multiple bomb hits triggered catastrophic explosions. Throughout her hull, the veteran carrier, participant in Pearl Harbor and countless Pacific victories, rolled over and sank within hours of the attack. Her experienced aircrews perished trapped below decks, taking with them irreplaceable knowledge gained through months of combat operations. Soryu absorbed 3 direct hits from Leslie's squadron, her flight deck buckling under the impact of armor-piercing bombs. Captain Ryusaku Yanagimoto chose to go down with his ship, standing at attention on the bridge as flames consumed the carrier around him. The vessel's death throes lasted through this afternoon, her magazines finally exploding in a pillar of smoke visible for miles. Only Hiryu remained operational from Nagumo's once invincible force, her position concealed by smoke from the burning carriers. Captain Tomio Kaku immediately launched a retaliatory strike against the American fleet, determined to salvage something from the morning's disaster. Lieutenant Michio Kobayashi led 18 Val dive bombers and 6 Zero fighters toward Yorktown's last known position, their crews understanding this might be their final mission. The Japanese counterattack found Fletcher's flagship at noon, scoring 3 bomb hits that damaged Yorktown's flight deck and disrupted her operations. American damage control parties worked frantically to restore the carrier's capability. While Fletcher transferred his flag to the cruiser Astoria. Despite suffering significant casualties, Yorktown's crew managed to get her underway again within 2 hours, a testament to American engineering and seamanship. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the Pacific battlefield, both fleets had suffered grievous losses. 3 of Japan's fleet carriers lay sinking or burning, their veteran air groups decimated in the morning's catastrophe, yet Hiryu remained dangerous, her experienced pilots preparing for a twilight attack that could still tip the battle's outcome. The day's fighting had reached its climax, but the final act of this maritime drama remained unwritten. Captain Tomio Kaku stood resolute on Hiryu's bridge as his carrier maneuvered through the smoke-shrouded battlefield, the sole survivor of Admiral Nagumo's once mighty striking force. Around him, the Pacific Ocean burned with the funeral pyres of Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, their hulk settling slowly beneath oil-slicked waves. The 53-year-old veteran understood that Japan's naval supremacy hung by the slenderest thread, dependent entirely on his ship's ability to inflict crippling damage on the American. At 13:05 hours, Lieutenant Michio Kobayashi's 18 Val dive bombers approached Yorktown. Through scattered cloud cover, their pilots grimly determined to avenge their fallen comrades. The American carrier had resumed flight operations, despite her earlier bomb damage, launching combat air patrol fighters to defend against the second Japanese attack. Lieutenant Commander John Thatch's fighting squadron 3 rose to meet the intruders, their Grumman Wildcats climbing desperately to intercept the diving bombers. The aerial battle above Yorktown raged with desperate intensity as Japanese pilots pressed their attacks through a curtain of anti-aircraft fire. 3 bombs struck the carrier's flight deck and hull, flooding her forward engine room and knocking out electrical power. The vessel listed heavily to port as damage control parties struggled to contain flooding in multiple compartments. Admiral Fletcher reluctantly transferred his command to the cruiser Astoria, believing Yorktown's fighting days had ended. Yet Captain Elliot Buckmaster's crew refused to abandon their ship, working heroically to restore power and correct the dangerous list. By 14:30 hours, engineering teams had restarted 1 boiler plant and reduced the flooding sufficiently to resume limited operations. The carrier's resurrection seemed miraculous to observers, demonstrating the superior damage control training that gave American vessels remarkable survivability. Compared to their Japanese counterparts, naval historian Craig Simmons documented these crucial damage control efforts in the Battle of Midway, highlighting how technical superiority influenced the engagement's outcome. Meanwhile, Admiral Spruance faced a critical decision aboard Enterprise as afternoon wore toward evening. His air groups had suffered heavy casualties during the morning attacks, with many experienced pilots shot down over the Japanese fleet. Intelligence reports indicated that at least one enemy carrier remained operational, posing a continued threat to American forces. Spruance chose aggression over caution, ordering a second strike to eliminate the surviving Japanese ship. Lieutenant Clarence Dickinson led Enterprise's reformed attack group toward Hiryu's position, his 24 Dauntless dive bombers accompanied by 16 fighters for protection. The veteran pilot had participated in the morning's devastating assault on the Japanese carriers, witnessing firsthand the destruction wrought by American precision bombing. Now he prepared to deliver the coup de grace to Japan's last operational fleet carrier. Hiryu's combat air patrol intercepted the incoming Americans 50 miles from their target, initiating a running battle that scattered both formations across the darkening sky. Zero fighters commanded by Lieutenant Kenjiro Notomi fought desperately to protect their ship, their pilots understanding that failure meant certain destruction for the carrier below. Several American bombers fell to the Japanese defenders, but Dickinson's main force pressed through to begin their attack. At 17:03 hours, 4,000-pound bombs struck Hiryu in rapid succession, transforming the carrier into a blazing wreck within minutes. Her flight deck collapsed into the hangar bay, while secondary explosions tore through her hull, igniting aviation fuel and ammunition stores throughout the ship. Captain Kaku ordered all hands to abandon ship as flames engulfed the bridge and engineering spaces. The destruction of Hiryu marked the end of Japanese carrier aviation's golden age, eliminating in a single day the veteran air crews who had dominated Pacific skies since Pearl Harbor. Lieutenant Commander Takeshi Maeda, the torpedo bomber leader who had helped sink Prince of Wales and Repulse, perished along with hundreds of his fellow aviators. Their irreplaceable experience and tactical knowledge died with them in the burning aircraft carriers scattered across Midway's waters. As darkness fell on June 4, 1942, Admiral Yamamoto faced the unthinkable reality of complete defeat. His carefully planned operation had resulted in the loss of 4 fleet carriers and their air groups, dealing Japanese naval power a blow from which it would never recover. The admiral, who had orchestrated Pearl Harbor, now contemplated the implications of his greatest failure, knowing that America's industrial might would soon overwhelm his diminished forces. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto paced the flag bridge of super battleship Yamato as urgent radio reports detailed the catastrophic destruction of his carrier striking force. The architect of Pearl Harbor absorbed each devastating message with stoic composure, his weathered features betraying no emotion, despite witnessing the collapse of his strategic masterpiece. 4 fleet carriers lay broken beneath Midway's waters, taking with them Japan's most experienced naval aviators and any hope of maintaining Pacific supremacy through carrier warfare. The combined fleet commander faced an agonizing decision as midnight approached on June 4th. His main battle force, centered on Yamato and Musashi with their massive 18-inch guns, remained intact several hundred miles west of the disaster area. These super battleships possessed the firepower to devastate any American surface force, provided Yamamoto could bring his enemies within range of their heavy armament. The question haunting his strategic calculations involved whether such a night engagement could salvage victory from the day's disasters. Captain Kuroshima Kameto, Yamamoto's chief of staff, studied damage reports from the scattered task forces while plotting American fleet positions on the chart table. "Admiral, our surface forces retain overwhelming superiority," he reported quietly. "If we can force a night action with their carriers, our battleships and cruisers will annihilate them." Yamamoto nodded thoughtfully, understanding that darkness offered his last opportunity to reverse the battle's outcome. Through Japan's traditional advantage in night fighting, Admiral Raymond Spruance confronted his own difficult choices aboard Enterprise as his task force steamed eastward through the Pacific darkness. Intelligence reports suggested that powerful Japanese surface forces were converging on Midway, potentially including Yamamoto's main battle fleet with its formidable array of battleships and heavy cruisers. The cautious admiral weighed the risks of pursuing damaged enemy units against the danger of exposing his precious carriers to night attack by superior surface forces. Military historian John Parshall analyzed these critical command decisions. In Shattered Sword, revealing how leadership philosophies shaped the battle's final phase. Spruance's decision to withdraw eastward during the night hours proved strategically brilliant. Denying Yamamoto the surface engagement that might have salvaged Japanese victory, the American admiral understood that his carriers represented irreplaceable assets, whose preservation outweighed any temporary tactical advantage gained through aggressive pursuit. His conservative approach reflected the broader American strategy of husbanding resources for the long campaign ahead. Meanwhile, the crippled Yorktown continued her death struggle in the pre-dawn darkness, her damage control parties fighting desperately to keep the carrier afloat. Captain Elliot Buckmaster had ordered abandonment at evening, but destroyer crews remained alongside attempting salvage operations. The vessel's list had stabilized at 26 degrees, offering hope that tugs might tow her back to Pearl Harbor for extensive repairs. At dawn on June 5th, Japanese submarine I-168 under Commander Yahachi Tanabe discovered the abandoned Yorktown, wallowing helplessly in the calm seas. The submarine commander maneuvered carefully into attack position, studying the massive carrier through his periscope as salvage crews worked frantically. On her tilted flight deck, Tanabe's torpedo spread struck both Yorktown and the destroyer, Hammond alongside her, sealing the carrier's fate with a thunderous explosion that echoed across the empty ocean. Yorktown's final plunge occurred at 05:08 hours on June 7th, her battle flag still flying as she disappeared beneath the Pacific swells. The carrier's loss removed one-third of America's effective naval aviation from the Pacific theater, yet her sacrifice had contributed to a victory that fundamentally altered the war's trajectory. Admiral Fletcher's decision to engage despite his ship's battle damage had ensured American numerical superiority. During the crucial phase of fighting, Yamamoto faced the bitter reality of strategic defeat as his surviving forces withdrew toward Japanese waters, their mission incomplete and their losses catastrophic. The invasion of Midway had failed utterly, with Admiral Kondo's transport fleet turning back before reaching the objective. More critically, Japan's naval aviation had suffered irreplaceable losses that would cripple offensive operations for the remainder of the war. The great admiral, who had warned against awakening America's industrial potential, now witnessed the consequences of his own prescient analysis. Japanese shipyards could not replace for fleet carriers and their experienced aircrews within any reasonable time frame, while American production would soon flood the Pacific with new vessels and pilots. The strategic balance had shifted decisively, though few participants understood the full implications of their 4-day struggle at Midway Atoll. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto stood silently on Yamato's bridge as his defeated fleet limped westward toward the Japanese home islands, the weight of catastrophic failure pressing upon his shoulders like a physical burden. The architect of Pearl Harbor had gambled everything on achieving decisive victory at Midway, only to witness the destruction of Japan's most powerful carrier striking force in a single morning's combat. For fleet carriers and their irreplaceable aircrews now rested on the Pacific floor, taking with them any realistic hope of maintaining naval supremacy against America's awakening industrial might. The strategic implications of the Midway disaster extended far beyond the immediate tactical losses, fundamentally altering the Pacific War's entire trajectory. Japan's combined fleet had suffered casualties that would never be replaced, losing veteran pilots whose combat experience represented years of irreplaceable training. Lieutenant Commander Takeshi Maeda, the torpedo bomber ace who had helped sink Prince of Wales and Repulse, perished along with hundreds of his fellow aviators when Hiryu exploded and sank. Their tactical knowledge and hard-won expertise died with them in the oil-slicked waters surrounding Midway Atoll. Admiral Chester Nimitz received preliminary battle reports at his Pearl Harbor headquarters with characteristic understatement, initially cautious about claiming complete victory until all Japanese forces had withdrawn from the operational area. The Pacific Fleet commander understood that American losses, though lighter than Japan's, still represented significant damage to his limited resources. Yorktown's sinking reduced his carrier strength by one-third, while pilot casualties among the air groups would require months to replace through training programs. Yet the strategic significance of American victory became apparent as intelligence assessments revealed the full scope of Japanese losses. Commander Joseph Rochford's codebreakers monitored enemy communications, describing desperate attempts to rescue survivors from the sunken carriers. Their intercepted messages revealing the true magnitude of the disaster. Japan's naval aviation had suffered a blow from which it would never recover, losing in for days what had taken decades to build. Historian Gordon Prange concluded in his comprehensive study, Miracle at Midway, that this engagement marked the turning point where American industrial capacity began determining the war's outcome. The psychological impact on Japanese leadership proved equally devastating. As the material losses suffered at Midway, Emperor Hirohito received reports of the defeat in stunned silence, understanding that his nation's early victories had been permanently reversed by this single engagement. The dream of dictating peace terms from conquered American territories evaporated with the smoke rising from his burning aircraft carriers, replaced by the grim reality of defending an overextended empire against increasingly powerful enemies. American morale soared as news of the victory spread throughout the Pacific Fleet and homeland population. The devastating surprise attack on Pearl Harbor had finally been avenged through superior intelligence, tactical skill, and individual courage displayed by naval aviators, who pressed home their attacks despite overwhelming odds. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey's decision to continue searching when fuel ran low had discovered the Japanese fleet at the crucial moment, while dive bomber pilots like Lieutenant Clarence Dickinson had demonstrated precision and determination. Under fire, the Battle of Midway's aftermath reshaped naval warfare doctrine across both fleets, proving that aircraft carriers had replaced battleships as the dominant weapon system. In Pacific combat, Yamamoto's super battleships Yamato and Musashi, despite their massive firepower, had proven irrelevant in a battle decided entirely by carrier aviation. Future naval construction programs would prioritize flight decks over heavy gun platforms, accelerating the transition to air-sea warfare that characterized the remaining war years. Japan's strategic position deteriorated rapidly following the Midway defeat. As American forces seized the initiative across the Pacific theater, the planned invasion of Australia became impossible without adequate carrier support, while defensive operations stretched Japanese resources beyond sustainable limits. Admiral Ernest King's strategic vision of island-hopping campaigns would exploit Japanese weaknesses exposed during the Midway engagement, steadily advancing American bases toward the enemy homeland. As Yamamoto's shattered fleet reached Japanese waters in early June 1942, the admiral contemplated the consequences of his greatest failure. The man who had accurately predicted America's industrial potential now witnessed its mobilization against his homeland. Understanding that time favored his enemies in every calculation, the sun that had risen over Pearl Harbor 7 months earlier was now setting on Japanese dreams of Pacific domination, its light fading beneath the waves where his carriers lay broken and silent. The Battle of Midway had ended Japan's offensive capability in the Pacific War, transforming a conflict of expansion into one of desperate defense. Admiral Nagumo's elite aircrews, the veterans who had terrorized Allied forces from Hawaii to Ceylon, would never again darken Pacific skies with their formations. In their place, American naval aviation would grow steadily stronger, fed by training, programs, and industrial production that dwarfed Japanese capabilities. The empire's sunset had begun at Midway Atoll, though its final darkness lay 3 years in the future.